Good afternoon. I'm Patrick Monks. I'm with the Department's Water Investment Division, Water Infrastructure Finance Program. And this is the public hearing for both the Clean Water and Drinking Water 2023 intended use plans and priority lists. Try and run the show, slideshow that is. Our agenda today, I'm going to cover just an overall introduction to what we're working on today. I'm going to pause 1 second. We've got a couple more. Yep. All right. In. All right, just to continue and welcome for you three who just joined us. I'm Patrick Monks with the Water Infrastructure Finance Program. This is the public hearing for the intended use plan and priority lists. Our agenda for this afternoon, we do have 2 hours scheduled. We've got a good number of slides to get through. We'll try to move that right along so we leave plenty of time for your questions. I'm going to cover the overall just introduction to the program and some updates. Lynette will be covering an update from the design and construction engineering program or section. And Tom Brown is going to cover the clean water intended use plan and priority list. And then Alfred will cover the drinking water side of things. Basic questions. We can take them as we go if there's anything pressing or urgent. Otherwise, we've got a break between each of the presentation sections to take questions there. In terms of the order, we'll take them if there's anyone who happens to have called in. I don't think so. And then in person, then anyone who's raised their hand in Teams, and then we're going to also monitor the chat. We don't intend to respond for the most part real time in chat, but we'll collect questions through there.
You are recording.
We are recording. Overall timeline for these intended use plans, we're taking public comment for another week until August 7th. We can receive those by email. There's links in the intended use plan public notice. Essentially, comments go to Tom and Amy or me. We can also take them today, verbally or preferably in writing. It's always a little better. Our goal is to release the final intended use plans by August 18th. Always takes a little longer than we think, and also depends on the extent of public comment and whether we need to make any revisions to the IUPs. And then our goal is to issue funds availability notification to projects by August 25th. Generally, in the past, we tried to have our new IUPs adopted concurrent with the state fiscal year of July 1. We're obviously running a little behind. The current intended use plans stay in effect until the new IUPs are adopted. All right, in terms of some overall updates, we are in year 2 of 5 of funding associated with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, BIL, also known as IIJA. It increased the number of grants that we received from EPA and also the overall funds available, although that's slowing down a little bit. We are also in, I don't know what year of ARPA we're in. ARPA funds need to be obligated by the end of December 2024 and expended by end of 2026. So those dates are getting a little closer. We'll hear a little bit more. That's update. All right, there's a lot on this slide, but basically this is covering the overall grants that we've received or are receiving from EPA. This slide covers the clean water side of things. We'll start with the bottom row, emerging contaminants. You'll see in 2021, there was $0 coming in. That was before we had the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So there were no specific funds coming in for emerging contaminants. Last year, we received just under $500,000. This year, it's up to $1 million, and that will continue through 2026. And then Bipartisan Infrastructure Law funding ends 2027. It goes back to 0. Emerging contaminant funds are necessarily made available as 100% forgiven under the terms of the grant from EPA. So if your project is receiving emerging contaminants funding, there's all funds are essentially forgiven. General supplemental and general grant is what that's what we call our base, or typically referred to as our base grant. You'll see this year we've got 10.2 million coming in, and that's combined with the 3.7. So for a total of almost 14 million. Compare that to where we were in 2021 was 7.8 million. So certainly we are seeing and still benefiting from the bipartisan infrastructure law funds. And just to step back a second, I mean, these are the funds we get as part of our grant from EPA. These are not the extent of funds that are available for projects. The majority of our funding that we have available comes from repayment funds from prior years projects that have been funded and that come back to the program. But I do want to draw attention to what happens starting next year, 2024. Even this year, 2023, if you look at the general grant, it's down 2 million from last year. And looking ahead, and this is an estimate and depends on how Congress allocates funds that we're currently going through budgeting now, our general grant will be down to 310,000. And it's unknown for the final 3 years. And then if you also look ahead, general supplemental also points down to 0 by 2027. So the reason for the reduction in the general grant is essentially congressionally directed spending, or CDS, also known as earmarks. The way the SRF program works is at the national level, Congress allocates a certain amount of funding for the nation as a whole, and then states are funded using a formula. On the clean water side, Vermont gets 0.5% of that total allocation. And on the drinking water side, it gets 1%. What Congress is doing now is that they take that general national allocation, and then all the congressionally directed spending awards that are SRF eligible are deducted from that. So regardless of what Vermont takes or receives as part of congressionally directed spending, even if California is getting a lot, that's coming out of the overall allocation. So the allocation drops. So this is a big jump. It's less money available for programs. Also means much less subsidy. All our non-disadvantaged subsidy comes through that general grant. So next year there's going to be next to none. We still receive, we have subsidy under the general supplemental grant. All that is necessarily directed to disadvantaged communities. So we don't know what the long-term prognosis is. And this has very significant implications, especially on the drinking water side of things. And on drinking water side, it's similar. You'll see 2024 next year. Our estimate is funding the grant will be down to 500,000 on the general side. We're still dealing with or receiving a significant increase in funds compared to where we were, say, 2021. We had a total of 7 million. This year we've got 28 million between general and general supplemental, another 28 million on the lead service lines, and 7.6 million in emerging contaminants. So we will start to programmatically feel a hit starting next year if the current trend continues. In terms of project funding, we're still looking pretty good this year. So that, in a nutshell, just a quick introduction to what we've got in store for you this afternoon. Any questions before we move on to updates from the design and construction engineering section? All right, hearing none. That just let me know when you want me to move the slide.
I do have one question. Sure. Is there a financial need component that's taken into consideration when awarding grants?
Not from EPA's level, I don't believe so. So EPA is, I guess their allocation formula is based on need in terms of infrastructure and population. I don't believe they're looking at the financial capacity of a given state.
What about this program?
In terms of like the money that we hand out?
Yeah.
Yes, there's project affordability affects both its priority scoring, and then also when we talk about subsidy or loan forgiveness, certain types of that subsidy are based on the recipient's ability to pay, whether they qualify as a disadvantaged community or whether they, on the clean water side, meet our affordability criteria.
Okay. But the initial funding isn't, is that correct? It's just a subsidy later.
Yes, but again, if a project's coming in for construction funding, they need to be on our priority list. That can affect their scoring as well and how they rank relative to other projects.
So initially getting on the priority list is there a financial need component is there financial need criteria?
Do you want to speak to Mr.
Sure, sure. So we can fund the preliminary engineering and final design at any time. Construction, you have to be on a priority list.
Yeah.
And when a project is put on a priority list, the application actually monitors the community's affordability at a higher level, looking at MHI and population change and unemployment. And then another part of it looks at the affordability of the project and its impact on user rates. And if your user rates hit 2%, that's the goal, is to keep user rates at 2% if you can. And
So the scoring in the intended use plan, would your score be higher if you're considered a disadvantaged community?
yes, the affordability points is a section where you can qualify for up to 20 points, but that's not a literal change in the priority point. There's a whole equation that goes in, but that is definitely part of the equation.
And on the drinking water side, there's also some points for affordability that's based on median household income. So that affects the points. In terms of how we rank the priority list, it's blind to, other than those points being included, it's blind to the cost of the project and the community at that point. So it doesn't matter if it's an expensive or cheap project. We rank them based on the scores. And then I'll have a slide near the end of mine that talks about disadvantaged community forgiveness for drinking water. There's a couple of criteria that go into it, which are primarily local income and several things that factor into a calculation about user rates. So is it an expensive project relative to what the users can pay? But I'll have a more detailed flow chart about that.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, you ready?
So I'm Lynette Cladone. I am the Chief Pollution Control Design Engineer for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. This is my colleague, Roger Bergeron, who's the Chief Construction Engineer for both clean water and drinking water. So there'll be a design slide and then a construction slide, which Roger has not seen yet, so please be kind to him.
Don't do that.
And then there'll be a little discussion on the village ARPA grant. So in terms of the design engineering announcements, last year in the IUP process, there was a comment from a community on their final priority list points. And we told them that we would update it when they went to final design. So going forward, we'll be updating all projects as they go to final design. So please plan on having a design meeting based on the project priority points at both the 90% PER and the 90% design to confirm any point. The PER meeting is likely to be a little bit longer and more involved because most of the project priority points for clean water are based on need. So most of those things shouldn't change as the project progresses. However, there are points that do progress as the project moves along, and some points may be dropped if a project element is dropped, specifically those under criterion 5. So please plan on those. Second, we are acknowledging that there's a scenario with the funding of step 2 as it currently exists. We have been working on it. We were really, really close to a resolution, and I regret that I'm not able to make the announcement today. To remind you that we have a portal now for submitting draft engineering services agreements through A&R Online. And please use that portal for making your draft engineering services submittals. As of the last year's IUP, there's a new executive floodplain order. We have been working on a guidance document related to that executive floodplain order, but it basically reenacts the Obama era executive floodplain order. So you should all already be familiar with it. We also have a new guidance document number 38 as it pertains to village wastewater eligibility. We'll talk about that more in the village ARPA slide. And then I understand there's a lot of heartburn right now over the SHPO procedures that we have. I understand that we're currently in the middle of renegotiating our MOU with SHPO, and learning what our SHPO process should have been according to our last MOU. So a lot of these things are officially not changes to SHPO, they're just changes for us.
State historic preservation.
Yes. So as a reminder for that, design section is doing all of the environmental reviews for both clean water and drinking water. To get an assignment, you need to ask Amy for an assignment, we'll ask Jeff for an assignment. When you're sending a document in for a SHPO review, it should come through your DCE engineer that's assigned. SHPO is asking to review scopes of work prior to the consultant doing the historic preservation work. And so you should also submit those to your DCE engineer for submittal to SHPO. We also have been working on best management practices for village wastewater test pits. I can give that to you in draft if you're interested, but it's still in draft and pending. A reminder that we would like to collect submittals through ANR's document portal, which is in the email signatures for your design section engineer. And lastly, we had a slide last year on our new state environmental review process. We were really excited and hoping that by now it would have gone out for public comment and we would be implementing it. However, that has not happened. So stay tuned for the same thing to happen going forward. So there will be a 30-day comment period when the state environmental review process is launching. We also are working on a new software program that will have a new portal. It's probably not ready in the next year.
We did a bit, yeah, I mean, the goal is to deploy in March.
Right.
So building that sort of external facing might be a little longer, but.
So when that is live, it will replace our other portal submittal processes discussed above. And lastly, we have a new FAQ on public hearings to provide a little bit of guidance for how to do those and meet the programmatic expectations.
Oh. So, current construction phase of things, BABA is required. In futuristically, projects basically built up of AIS. BABA just has some additional materials that will need to be required to conform with that requirement. There is a waiver form. And if you go to our DC website, WID, and type in forms, it's the last one on the bottom of the page. So you'll find a BABA waiver requirement. And basically what we're keying in is if you have a PER in that time frame from prior to May 22nd of 2022, you should be able to get that waiver. I would encourage you to do it sooner than later. It should be done in the design phase, not in the construction phase. So I would encourage you, and we're going to bring that up over and over again, but we want to make sure that's done prior to the work occurrence, because the language has to be put in the document itself in the construction specifications. There is BABA language that I would encourage you to, when you put in the advertisement, on the advertisement, put in AIS is required and BABA is required. We'll decide as the project proceeds. All you do is cross out the BABA requirements. If AIS is not required, I mean, AIS is always going to be required, but if BABA does come true that you don't get the waiver, BABA will be the governing requirement. We'll have language in the contract specifications to be added into the contract documents for your pleasure. So I would encourage you to take a look at the certification form. It does talk in detail various things and has questions and answers how to do that. We are currently accepting the EJC DDC 2018 version. There is I don't think you can get the 2013 version anymore. So I encourage you, you're allowed to use the 2013, 2018, and guess what? Every 5 years, there's another version. I'll be probably getting one this year. And when that comes about, I will do a full guidance document to support that project, that entity of it. Right now, we're behind the 8 ball in 2018 because of COVID. We didn't receive the approved documents that we piggyback on USDA RD till probably 3 years into the process of 5 years of having that document. So we didn't provide a full guidance document, but the next version we will, and we'll give you more detail. Any questions on that at all? No? Clear as mud?
Just a quick one, Roger.
Yes.
EJCDC 2013, 2018, that's the construction contracts, not
Yes.
the step 3 ESA.
No.
ESAs. Okay,
No,
just wanted to check.
no, it's the construction part of it.
Okay.
ESA version is still the let's see, what is it, that 500 version? Still currently 2014 version is still currently. We are going to be looking at a smaller entity of that 2000 for a project that's 250,000 and below, of using a smaller version. They call it for small purchasing in EJCDC. They do have one. I'm in cooperation with USDA RD with Jonathan Harris to evaluate that and see if we can consider that for small projects. Let's see, control alert, signage requirement terms. Okay. Oh yeah, bill signage. There is going to be some interesting signage that has to be put up for the Biden infrastructure part of it. There's going to be certain tags to that, not our normal project signs. And there's also going to be language in the construction aspect of specifications that we're going to have to incorporate that. We will guide you through that. We'll provide you guidance on that. Right now, at this current time, we're revising the language as we speak. And then just constantly reminding the SF form 144 is the Davis-Bacon classification form request form. Has been expired. Use the newest version that's on the website. It's 2025 is the most current version. I just encourage you to do that when you do the new applications for new determinations for classifications. If you don't do it, I'm going to remind you again to just currently do that. It does create some havoc with Department of Labor in Washington, D.C. when I do submit it as a contract officer to evaluate for new determinations. So, any questions? Exciting topic, I'll tell you.
In terms of the village ARPA grants, for wastewater projects, these are for unsewered villages. For drinking water projects, they're for villages that don't have an existing public community system. So really it's for projects that are having brand new systems planned. Again, guidance document 38 applies to the eligibility for village wastewater projects and the limits eligibility to the designated center, the buffer to the designated center as applied for in statute, and certain areas related to the disposal field and conveyance to the disposal field. The ARPA funds that we have are already in the process of being awarded. So in terms of what appears in the IUP, there's a list of awards that are in progress and a list of waiting villages. So if you're a waiting village, you're waiting for what we're calling trickle down funding. So if a village that has an award right now de-obligates that funds because they don't make a milestone or they are unable to proceed with their project, then the trickle down funds may be used for design and construction activities in accordance with the priority list for the waiting villages. There are funding caps defined in the IUP for this IUP and for the waiting villages. The chart for the villages is confusing in the IUP and there are multiple charts, so we are replacing it with the following chart. So the first upper part of this chart is those with ARPA awards. And the bottom part of this chart is the waiting list towns. They're in order of points. The highest ranking towns are listed first with their request amounts. And we would anticipate being able to award on the 24 requests in the order of priority with CAP applications. Any questions?
On the previous slide, you said that the eligibility for Killington contracts may change.
So we had listed, like you see in the top one, it says contract board. We had listed a number of contracts behind Killington. And because of some fluctuations going on with the project, we decided to take those contract names off so that it was more flexible.
Okay, so I know in the previous list, there was a couple of ineligible contracts.
Yes, that's also part of why.
So those might become eligible.
The eligibility criteria are still the same. So the project has to be DW SRF eligible to be able to use them. So if you have questions on that, I'd ask Megan.
But so to summarize, it's more the name of the contracts changed? Or
Yes,
is this dollar amounts or eligibility?
just how it appears on the list. So right now it says for the first list says Killington and Contract 4, and the second list says Killington Drinking Water System without any specific.
Could you talk a little bit about the bypass process of, the different milestones? Say some funds become unobligated at the first milestone, then what's the procedure?
So the grant agreements for the ARPA grants include a number of milestones and deliverable requirements and language that says that the money has to be rescinded if the community isn't able to meet the major milestones. The first of the major milestones is land acquisition. So it will vary a little bit depending on the grant agreement, but we should know in January if there is money being deobligated.
And then what happens?
There's a deobligation process, and then we would start the grant writing process with the next community on the list.
Okay. In January or sometime?
I'd like to think in January.
Okay.
I'm just not sure.
Okay.
I just quickly, before I move on to clean water, I just want to address, there was a comment or a question in the chat about whether there's a public comment portion of this hearing. And yes, when we pause for question, if anyone wants to offer a comment, please just please do so. Because I'd like to offer the following comment, and we're recording that. Again, you can submit them by email, or if you want to submit them in the chat, just make note that it's a comment. Right. Covered questions on that portion. All right. Tom.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm Tom Brown with the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Patrick talked briefly about our higher end figures for all of our funds. So I'm just going to kind of go through what we showed on our priority list at this point. We really have about, I guess it would be about $88 million shown as available funds on the priority list for this year. The general is the historical repayment schedules, funds coming back in. But you'll see our CAP grants were discussed earlier. They're a little lower because of the congressional directed spending that was provided. And So the three grants are totaling around 88 million or 90 million. So 81 million for the general, and the supplemental is 14 million. We carried forward the original emerging contaminants from last year because it went unused. So this year we have a total of 1.4 million on emerging contaminants. Slide. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. All right, so we did receive yet again another record number of priority list applications for funding. We're looking at a shortfall of about 75 million if everybody stayed with affordability criteria through construction of their project. Um, that's why we have our bypass procedure. Because if some project is not ready to go, we want to get to the other people that are waiting as well. Which leads to the next. So there hasn't been a change in the priority list ranking for this year. It's still the chapter 2 of the environmental protection rules. Our priority list application is probably going to be revised for the coming year, but for this year, it was modestly changed from the previous year. So there's 9 criteria in the priority list, and the application does the calculation for us. We then go through a verification process to check on the answers that were provided in the documentation to back up those answers. The priority list is used for ranking, but and not just ranking, but also used for pollution control grant ranking and percentage calculation. So the eligibility comes into play. We're going to say preliminary eligibility because sometimes the priority list application is provided is subject to change based on the merits of the project, as Lynette mentioned earlier. So readiness to proceed criteria for this year. Again, this year, we weren't able to get onto our priority list unless you had a preliminary engineering report submitted to us. So all projects that we're showing have a preliminary engineering report or equivalent. So what we're looking at now is we should be seeing a step 2 loan application from you by November 1st. An environmental information document by December 1st. And then January 1st, we're looking for 90% design. And then you should have your bond vote scheduled by the end of January with a positive bond vote and documentation of that vote by May 1st. And then the last day you could submit an application for this funding is June 30th of this year. Additional subsidy for this year. We've kind of changed things up a little bit. This past year we ran out of planning subsidy, so we've bolstered that a little bit. So for our general grant, we have $1.4 million that are provided. 368,000 of it is what we call add sub anybody. So it's first come, first served, and it's planning subsidy. And then we also have 1.1 million in planning subsidy that is based on affordability. So you would have to be meeting the affordability criteria, or we allow for a project to meet what we call 603I, which is part of the Clean Water Act. And that is specifically to address, I'll read it, to implement a process, material, technique, or technology to address water efficiency goals, to address energy efficiency goals, to mitigate stormwater runoff, or to encourage sustainable project planning, design, and construction. So that is part of what's come in with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, is it affected how we're handling subsidy. We traditionally provided subsidy for step 1 and 2 with no questions asked. Now that it's affordability based. So we do have just a small bucket of money. The 368,000 is not affordability based. All right. And then the general supplemental, we have a substantial amount of subsidy available for that. That is all affordability criteria and 603I requirements are going to apply to that. And then the emerging contaminants is another almost $1 million as well, with no restrictions on those. So that means it does not need to meet affordability or the 603. Next slide. So we broke this subsidy up by category. This slide here is a good summary showing that we do have $2.5 million in our planning subsidy. So it kind of mirrors what we just had on the previous slide. There's different types of subsidy within planning. Some of it is affordability based, some of it is not. We are continuing the Lake Champlain TMDL affordability additional subsidy again this year. We have a $500,000 budget for that, and that's affordability based as well. Emerging contaminants. This is all eligible activities, planning, design, construction, and there's no restrictions on those funds for subsidy. Oh, there it goes. Took a little lag. All right. So the details of planning subsidy. It's been very popular. We've been doing it for quite a few years now. It's 50% up to $100,000 for your preliminary engineering and your final design loans. I guess I should maybe it'd be good to say what planning subsidy really is. It's loan forgiveness, loan principal forgiveness. The second category of planning subsidy is 100% subsidy up to $125,000 per borrower for certain specific projects. And those are the CSO long-term control plan and H&H modeling, municipally sponsored 3-acre stormwater retrofit design and permit obtainment, village wastewater initiative, septic receiving facilities, cybersecurity, and auto sampler purchase this year is new. And then we have category 3 of planning subsidy, which is emerging contaminants, and that's 100% up to $150,000 per project. And the Lake Champlain affordability TMDL subsidy. So this is a project. This is a type of subsidy that we've been carrying for several years now. Municipality needs to meet multiple effluent limits under their NIPD's 2016 TMDL under their permit. Post-project user rate has to be over 4%. We mentioned affordability earlier is 2% is kind of what we shoot for. They do have to apply for construction by June 30th of 2023. So that has passed. 100% forgiveness up to $500,000 for 4 sequential funding years, up to a $2 million maximum, and it's an administrative fee of 0%. Next slide. Construction subsidy. We've made some changes here to make it, I want to say more available, but more of it available. We used to have a $500,000 cap for subsidy, and we've moved it up to $750,000 this year. You have to meet our affordability criteria. And 50% loan forgiveness is the percentage. So you'd have to borrow 1.5 in order to get the full 750. Emerging contaminant subsidy is 100% forgiveness up to $500,000 per project. And any emerging contaminant project is eligible. And then qualifying for subsidy. You can't just submit a loan application. You have to actually, it's subsidy is for municipalities only. And you do have to provide a qualifications-based selection process documentation to us that you procured your engineer using an RFQ that meets federal requirements. You also have to have a draft engineering service agreement to submit to us. And you provide those with your funding application, and that gets you in a reserve status for subsidy if you qualify. Additional subsidy is not guaranteed until the loan's approved. At that point, we consider it obligated, and an authorized letter of funding is provided. And that is where you can hang your hat on your subsidy. The subsidy does change with your project cost too. If your project comes in under budget, then the subsidy is reduced in kind on the percentage. It's usually 50%. If you're below the maximum, you'll see a reduction with your loan closeout. Okay. Natural infrastructure funding. This is something that we started really getting involved in the last few years. We do have some eligible projects here of forest land conservation, river corridor easements, dam removal, wetland restoration, floodplain, and stream restoration. The bottom line is it does need to provide a water quality benefit, and it must meet the definition of a non-point source pollution project, also known as a Section 319. Our technical experts on this part of the program are our basin planners within our department. And if you have any doubt on any of the projects, give us a call and we can talk about whether your idea is fundable or not, or eligible. Okay. And there's three mechanisms that we use to fund natural infrastructure. The first is the Water Infrastructure Sponsorship Program that is being revitalized. We actually have hired a new employee that will be working specifically on that mechanism. And as in the past, we've had interim financing, and that continues on as well. And the other option is to just do our regular loan process. So we have a $2 million put aside proposed this year. If you're a municipality and you qualify for that put aside, you'll be looking at a 0% admin fee. Private entities can get down to 0.6%, and it would be a 5-year loan. And we have some flexibility with repayment schedules. We are allowed to put up a balloon payment at the end if you're using it to bridge with other funding. We also are continuing again this year with our Farmland Futures Fund. Vermont Land Trust has been very involved in using this put aside. They have it is an interim financing mechanism, and they are purchasing and refinancing purchases of property to provide a water quality benefit. So the Water Infrastructure Sponsorship Program, we call it WHISPER. So this is a process where we have a traditional SRF project that is going to sponsor a natural resource project. And it's a mechanism where we set up a 10-to-1 ratio of funding. So if you have $1 million project, you can sign up for Whisper and you would end up with a $1.1 million loan with a reduced administrative fee, so that at the end of the loan, you're paying the same amount. That's the idea, is we're changing our administrative fee into principal for your loan, so you can do your non-point source project for free, so to speak. And also as a part of Whisper, to entice a traditional project to go through the process, we do reduce the administrative fee another 0.1%. I like to call it, it's the cool guy discount. All right. Do we have any questions? I see a hand up.
Any in the room first? We're good.
Yeah.
Yes. I can't see the name on.
Go ahead, Liz.
Hi, thanks. So I had a question for Tom, but I also just have a general question about whether I have to wait till 3 p.m. to make all the general comments I'd like to make.
No, you feel free to provide your comments now. That's fine.
Okay,
Yep.
Thank you. So Tom, I was just curious about the new $750,000 ceiling for additional subsidy, but then you said it's only for municipalities. Is that because of the source of funding it's coming from?
That is true, that it is subsidy is only for municipalities. That's the way it has always been. And it's part of the requirement. I believe that's a federal requirement.
You mean that only municipalities can get that additional subsidy?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So if I may just take the time for public comment, because there didn't seem to be any on the agenda. It says, being new to this field, the way we do things in the housing world when we do a state plan for HUD, is there's extensive public comment that is structured into the meeting and the hearing. So first off, as an environmental justice issue, I think it would be important for the department to become familiar with some of those practices. Just to introduce myself, I'm Liz Curry. I'm a consultant. I spent 25 years developing affordable housing, including redeveloping mobile home parks in Franklin and Glendale counties. And I've been a consultant since 2020, currently working with the mobile home park community. I'm speaking for myself, but also after multiple conversations with the sector that I'm working with. And I think my sense is that it's a new sector for many of you. And as you've observed, it's a very difficult program for us to understand. So for that reason, I wanted to take this opportunity, because there just hasn't been another one, to really have a opportunity to share a lot of the experiences and comments that those of us in the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition Mobile Home Community Subcommittee have been discussing. So since there is no environmental justice embedded in the statute or federal regulations, I just wanted to ask that the state be more vigilant about using an equity lens when you are applying and interpreting federal guidance, and particularly for the IUP, that is new in terms of seeing some language, which is very much appreciated. And so thank you for incorporating the long-term goal that promotes initiatives to address systemic environmental justice through the prioritization of incentives to projects that ensure equitable access to clean water. It sounds like a promising goal, and it's moving the program in the right direction, but it's not really defined or clarified in the document. So there's kind of a lack of specificity about what constitutes incentives, and the document lacks clarity on what the department understands environmental justice to be. I mean, I think we can think of environmental justice as disparities that are not not only about low-income households having to shoulder the burden of the water and wastewater issues that hurt the environment as well, but in fact, environmental justice is about equity for low-income households that are shouldering a cost burden. And that cost burden can be translated to trying to work with a very difficult and expensive program. So in other words, like HUD and USDA, their statutes are were actually written with the goal of reducing disparities. So those statutes and regulations embody or really embed the outcomes being the closing of disparities and improving community outcomes that relate to income and employment. And in the same way, it would be, I think, beneficial to all of our low-income households in mobile home parks if the department understood how to move this program in that direction of not just reducing environmental harm, but also reducing the income burden as well as the health burden that legacy failed water infrastructure creates. So in general, for every goal the department put in the document, there should be a strategy and outcomes associated with those goals. Otherwise, the goal really has no way of receiving funding or being budgeted for. So a suggestion for a strategy that aligns with the long-term goal of incentives for environmental justice would be invest in the mobile home community sector to reverse the discriminatory impacts that the lack of regulation prior to the Clean Water Act had on low-income households who now must contend with costs and health consequences. Another long-term goal would be reduce the cost burden that the SRF program's administrative rules and processes have on mobile home communities when infrastructure projects are co-funded and underwritten by the state's housing grant-making agencies and or the USDA. A strategy would be to develop an interagency agreement with the state's housing funding agencies that minimizes conflicting or duplicative administrative rules and practices and align regulatory frameworks. It's great to see number 3 on the short-term goal list to create funding opportunities for economically disadvantaged mobile home communities with water infrastructure needs. And then a strategy that should get funding is to work collaboratively with the state's housing grant makers to explore the feasibility of a pilot program that has a set aside of a portion of the SRF repayments. And by setting aside a portion of the SRF repayments, which are quite substantial, I understand we are competing with municipalities for those repayments. But with those repayments, you could do something like subsidize half of the $1.5 million project. So you could use an equity lens and take the repayments and provide additional construction loan subsidy so that it's on par with the municipalities. I have more comments. I'm just looking at my disorganized document. Oh, the other thing I wanted to comment on is the affordability criteria is very obscured in terms of whether or not it really serves the mobile home community well. On page 23 in the first paragraph, the affordability criteria applies only to municipalities. Yet I don't think that's what you mean, but that's what the language says. The federal guidance allows for other data determined relevant by the state. So the department should expand the affordability criteria because of the guidance allowed by the EPA in the January 2015 guidance memo. And in the 2015 memo, there's language that says the statute does not prescribe the weight that must be given to each type of affordability criteria. States have the flexibility to determine which of the required criteria are most relevant to clean water programs and may structure the programs accordingly. So for mobile home communities, the unemployment and population trends don't really have much of an impact on their situation or affordability. but it's really the resident incomes within the community and the lot rent and the aging condition of the infrastructure. And I just want to remind everybody that municipalities, no matter how low income they are, they have ratepayers that they can spread rates across different types of ratepayers and create an equitable structure. Mobile home communities don't have that. So they're already disadvantaged for that reason. And any additional cost they have goes into lot rent increases. So, you know, right there, there's just inherently this inequitable structure between municipalities and mobile home co-ops, no matter how low income the municipality is. There's a broader base of ratepayers that can, and they can structure those rates according to commercial and residential and other factors. So also, economically distressed area is not defined in the IUP. It may be in the regulations, but the public shouldn't have to go searching through regulations to find out what that means, particularly when we're talking about environmental justice. Economic distress is a key indicator. So it would be helpful if the document kind of illuminated these terms. Many mobile home communities are economically distressed communities, as we all know. But using the community's census AMI doesn't always align with residents' income. So you can have, like Swanton, you can have a census AMI that's high, but a mobile home community in that town is not doing well. Or more than one communities. USDA, this is the problem with USDA. They allocate grant resources based on the census AMI of the town. And as a result, many MHCs can't qualify for USDA grant resources. So if A&R approaches this in the same way, then mobile home communities have less access to water infrastructure resources overall. And this represents a disparity for households with low incomes who should have access to the state resources first. So USDA has its federal restrictions and can't do anything about that. But SRF, the state doesn't have the same restrictions. You can be more flexible. Also, enforcement citation. Excuse me.
I apologize for interrupting, but I do need to limit your comments right now, just in the interest of getting through the entire agenda. We can continue if you want to offer additional comments or continue your comments after we've gotten through the rest of the presentation. That would be fine.
Yeah.
We have a lot of.
So would that be at 3 o'clock?
I'm not sure how long the next session will be. So
Well, I
covering the
think
drinking water side of things.
it's problematic that you would put a public hearing and not allow the public to comment. I can't sit here for an hour and, not
I have
work.
to take the entire room and other audience members' interest in consideration as well. We have received about 10 minutes.
Well, you have,
right now.
I mean,
And we're
the way
opening
you
it up again.
structured this was to have staff presentations at your public hearing. So I guess, my overall comment is there should be a public hearing that's for a public hearing, not for staff to explain the document, to each other. So that appears to be what's happening, and being cut off is, just a comment that, should probably go to the EPA as well as the Environmental Justice Advisory Council.
It's very common for us to offer a presentation on the document and receive comment.
Right, but to put the public at the end is just, it's clearly, you have a lot to learn. So I'll just submit them.
Written comments are accepted.
The Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Councilor, okay. Well. All right.
Okay, I'm kind of hidden off the side here from where the camera is oriented. So I'm Amy Galford. I'm going to cover the drinking water SRF program. And I do think, Liz, that there's a few things in my section that will touch on some of the points that you're making in terms of how things are defined for drinking water. So that may be helpful. One thing I always like to revisit with drinking water is who can actually be a borrower for the drinking water SRF program. Our eligibility in terms of who can borrow and what types of projects are eligible is grounded in the Safe Drinking Water Act. So our borrowers is the owner of a regulated public water system. And if you are a regulated public water system, that does not include private wells. It doesn't include extremely small water systems. It's the ones who our Drinking Water Groundwater Protection Division regulates, and you will have an assigned WSID number and that sort of thing. all community water systems in Vermont are eligible, whether they are municipally owned or privately owned. Municipal tends to be towns and villages, also includes fire districts. And the private water systems for a community might be a mobile home park, a homeowners association, that sort of thing. The other option is not a community system, but a different user base, a non-community system. And those, there's specific regulatory definitions for what constitutes a non-transient versus a transient non-community system. Basically, these are going to include things like office parks, schools, restaurants, campgrounds. The biggest focus that we have in terms of the nonprofit non-community systems is typically schools or municipal buildings that have their own wells, like a town hall or that sort of thing. So that's who can borrow from us, and that's one of the first things to be clear about. And then the eligibility, there is a federal handbook that's linked off of our website and various other places. And it's actually a very readable document about what project types and expenses are eligible for DWSRF funding. We also have a specific state guidance document, number 8, that I'll say a little bit more about down below, but it's got a few clarifications for specific state things. But primarily we're following the federal guidance driven by the Safe Drinking Water Act. And so our project prioritization is primarily based on public health protection and upgrades of existing infrastructure. So it's looking at the water systems that we already have and making sure they can continue to provide safe drinking water. We have rare instances of new water system, I should say community water systems there being created or expanded. That's only DWSRF eligible if there's a serious public health risk involved. Not just because it's a good idea or because it makes sense for economic development, but we really have to be grounded in the public health protection component. And if you're considering a project and you're not sure where it falls on that, you definitely want to consult with, you can check in with me or other DWSRF staff first, and primarily that determination is going to come from the Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division. Creating a new public water system requires an extensive capacity evaluation, more than what's required just for getting an SRF loan, but more about making sure that any potential system would have the ability, the technical, managerial, and financial capacity to properly run a new public water system. Some general DWSRF updates. As many of you have realized, we've had a lot of staff turnover. So Patrick started about 2 years ago. I started about 1.5 years ago. Megan Koss was with our program for a while, but recently left. And some of you will start meeting Katie and Sarah, who started recently. Katie Parrish is with us today, and Sarah couldn't make it today. In terms of who to send what, Patrick and I are figuring out how to route things accordingly. For the near-term future, it will likely still be me focused on construction loans, and Katie and Sarah picking up the asset management plan and service line inventory loans. And then we're going to have to divvy up all the planning and design work. I'll say more about some of those loan types later, but bear with us as we also will be refilling Megan Koss's position. So we will have another new staff member in the future. So we are definitely trying to increase our staff to get caught up on our backlog and to get the new bill money out. A few tips on recently updated guidance documents. Guidance document number 2 talks about how we review and score the priority list applications. So we updated that this winter in parallel to updating the priority list application itself. So they're very similar, the application and the guidance document themselves. They're very similar to each other. And it also has a little bit of new information about the new the revisited source protection loans and how those will be scored. Guidance document number 8 is the one that's the state eligibility guidance. That had a minor change to it in 2021. The federal eligibility changed related to dams and raw reservoirs. Those were originally not eligible because they were seen as being primarily for expanding and growing water systems. But the reality is older water systems can have dams and raw water reservoirs that need upgrades at this point. So those were made eligible on the federal level in 2021. That federal handbook is just a few years out of date from that. So I added a comment. And then guidance document 10 covers our loan types and terms, and there are many, many updates in that one. The older one we had gotten considerably out of date. So that can be a helpful starting place if you're new to the SRF program. in terms of what types of loans we offer, say 5-year repayments, 30-year repayments, what's the interest rate, that sort of thing. That's a good place to consult for that information. And then similar to what Lynette mentioned earlier, we have actually 2 A&R online sites that are active right now. One of them is for loan applications and the other one is for draft engineering services agreements. Part of the reason for using the A&R online sites is it gives you an official timestamp of when you applied. And also particularly for drinking water right now, but in general with all the staff that we have and that the drinking water division also has turnover and additional staff who've been hired, we need to keep track of what's going where and how to assign work. So rather than trying to send things to an individual person by email, we need them to come in through A&R online. The one exception to that I'll talk more about later is the service line inventory loans. Next slide. Okay, so Patrick covered this, so I'll just fly through it quickly. But as a reminder, for drinking water, we have 4 underlying EPA grants, and the differences between them are about the project types that are eligible. And we're in the second of 5 years of this special funding. So there's the emerging contaminants, lead service line replacement, and service line inventories. I'll cover each of those on a separate slide later. And then there's a general category where the eligibility is the same, but it's coming from 2 underlying EPA grants. And it's a little confusing because the base is smaller than the supplemental, but it's the combination of the 2 that we lump together on the general eligibility category. And technically everything on emerging contaminants and lead would also be eligible for the general funding, which is just what we've always historically had. When the money comes in from EPA for drinking water, it goes sort of down 2 paths. There's some of what we call set-asides, and we'll go into more detail in the next slide on that. That covers statewide initiatives and 2 specific types of loans. Most loans that most of you have used are coming through a big chunk of money. There's some differences in how we process loans for planning and design work that we also call step 1 and 2 versus construction loans, step 3. A lot of that is also laid out in that update to guidance document 10 and on our website. So we have these 4 money types coming in, 3 types of eligibility, and therefore we have 3 priority lists: the emerging contaminants, the lead, and the general. So those are scored and ranked separately. The general is a combined list, and in terms of on the general list, if you're getting base versus supplemental money, the difference is primarily in our behind the scenes accounting. But we do have to explain that on the general priority list as part of our application to EPA, so it looks a bit confusing. And then there are different loan forgiveness rules according to the funding source. So there's kind of a general overview of that in that guidance document 10. And then also the things that vary from year to year, we will update with each IUP cycle. Next slide. So a little on the set-asides, and if anyone has questions on these, Megan Young is in the room to help answer questions on those. These come from all the 4 source grants, but I'm just going to talk about them collectively. These are many initiatives that enable state regulatory and financing programs, so state salaries, contracts that apply to multiple water systems, that sort of thing. So that's covered in section 6 of the IUP, or Megan Young is the best contact for that. She's the Sustainable Infrastructure and Management Program Manager, and she is with us today. This includes specifically one newer thing is technical assistance from staff and contractors to support service line inventory development, and I'll say a little more about that on a later slide about that requirement. The 2 types of loans that I mentioned earlier are asset management plan loans. These are available for municipal systems with 100% forgiveness up to $50,000 if you meet specific criteria. So there's a guidance document that says, okay, not just anything goes in an asset management plan. We need certain elements for that to count as a formal capital AMP asset management plan. And there's also a training requirement so that multiple people understand what goes into the plan and the principles behind it. So that forgiveness comes from this special set-aside funding. Non-municipal systems can also apply for an asset management plan, but they would do that under our general planning loan program, and it will follow the forgiveness rules. We have, for a long time, had a source protection loan program. We put a little bit of extra money into it last year, and I talked a little bit more about it last year, but that is to purchase lands or easements. So there are a few things about process to work out for that program, but if you're interested in that, you can contact us for more information. Next slide. Okay, so planning loans, this is kind of parallel to some of the stuff that Tom talked about for clean water. We tend to use the term planning as a generic term for both, for multiple things for drinking water. It can be development of new sources, typically drilling a new well. It can be a step 1 preliminary engineering process or other types of planning, or it can be a step 2 design process. The ultimate end goal, if it's a thing that's going to be constructed, has to be eligible. So we're not going to go through the planning for that would not be SRF eligible. These loans can come to us on a rolling basis. We generally are just funding them as we can get through the applications as they come in. In theory, we could do priority list ranking within them if it's necessary, but we haven't about these types of loans in the IUP and in the planning section on the general priority list. The subsidy that we're providing, the loan forgiveness subsidy that we're providing for these, it's the same formula for any borrower on this one. We don't have a lot of this form of loan forgiveness because this is coming just out of the base grant, which is smaller now. These are kind of first come, first served, 25% of the 70 per project. There's not a lot to go around. I know 25% isn't a huge change in that. If we tried to spread it out even more, it would be a smaller percentage. So that's what we proposed this year. And then when you have a planning loan and part of it is forgiven, the unforgiven part can be rolled into a subsequent design or construction loan. So if it's a step 1 loan, you can roll it into the step 2 loan, or the step 2 can roll into a step 3 loan. And so it may actually be a while before the loan goes into repayment. What you do need to do as you're tracking that over time is make sure when you're talking about the construction costs, are you including the prior planning and design costs, or are you just counting the new construction loans? That's one thing as I've picked up construction loan projects that gets a little confusing is figuring out whether those are including the earlier costs or not. And then I just got a point there for those of you who've been with the program, involved in it for a while. There were some older planning loans that were kind of rolling them in from one account to another. And there's a specific process for that. That's going to kind of move out over time. It's been about 5 years since that process has been going on. The older situation is covered in guidance document 22, where I can answer individual questions about that. Next slide. Okay, so for construction loans, which is usually the larger money, priority list applications for this cycle were due on March 1st. It gets a little confusing talking about the years. For drinking water, we talk about it based just on the federal fiscal year. There's the point at which we get money from Congress. There's the point at which we get the allocation from the EPA and we apply for it, and then there's when we actually give it out. So it sometimes feels like our dates are behind schedule, but that's the reason for that. When those priority list applications come in, and this is what's covered in that guidance document 2, we assess them for eligibility. I think everyone this year was at least mostly eligible. There may have been some specific parts of projects that were not eligible, but generally eligible. And then are they ready to be ranked? Some people are giving us planning or design priority list applications. They're not required, but they can be helpful for us for planning. And they can kind of highlight your project on our list. They also help us budget for how much we need to put into the planning category and even planning ahead for construction down the road. So for that readiness to just be ranked on our list, it's looking for a preliminary engineering report or some kind of equivalent of that. For certain projects, it may not be a formal exact PER, it may be a slightly different document or requirement. I tend to give those a quick eligibility and just completeness screen, and it's primarily the drinking water and groundwater protection regulatory staff who do the scoring verification. So in terms of the ranking, again, that's covered in guidance document 2, and I tried to put more detail in the form itself this cycle about where the points are coming from. For some of the continuing projects, it's a little challenging because we're putting together our next priority list while applications are still coming in the prior year. So there are some projects I've been made aware of that will really fall in this continuing category. But that'll get worked out. The main thing is you'll see some continuing projects that have $0 assigned to them, and that's really just that I'm going to take care of that in the current loan that's under review. And the additional money will just be worked in there. Basically, we have to try really hard not to double count or undercount the money we're giving out while we're transitioning between funding cycles. But that's more of an accounting thing than anything that affects projects that much. The scoring is primarily driven by deficiencies, and I have a capital D deficiency there because this is not just old infrastructure. We have hundreds of water systems in Vermont that have very old infrastructure, but this is really things that get flagged in sanitary surveys as public health issues or potential issues that need to be remediated. And then there's also points for upgrading existing infrastructure. You can get additional points for having an asset management plan. So that kind of feeds back to the point of we've been encouraging asset management plans for years now to help systems assess their assets and prioritize what needs to be taken care of. Additional points for having a construction permit because you've already got through the design and permitting process there. And then a special note in terms of the points for the asset management plan, we will be requiring proof that the asset management plan is being updated and utilized by the water system over time. So not just that, 7 years ago you wrote an asset management plan and it's been sitting on a shelf. It needs to be a living document that you're updating and using. There are what's called affordability points here. We mostly use a different term for drinking water, but there is an affordability score that's based on the local median household income versus the state MHI. And then there are also some points for system size where we give more points for smaller systems. Just like we talked about with clean water, there's you have to meet criteria to proceed throughout the year, or you may be bypassed and just end up reapplying during the next cycle. Given that our construction funding cycle turns over in the middle of construction season, it may not make that much difference which particular IUP cycle a project is on. And the funding line may also move down. We have that initially. We have about $150 million in request and about $55 million in general funding to give out. So we have more money from the infrastructure funding, but there's just so much demand. The initial funding line is, our best guess of the time we're putting the priority lists and the IUP together, and that may move down during the year. Some projects may get other funding sources. They may go to USDA, they may get ARPA funding, they may get other grant funding, that sort of thing, or for some reason they're not going ahead this year, and those may be bypassed to next cycle. And to the extent we can keep up with that, we can keep moving that funding line down through the year and notify more projects. Next slide. So this is still then talking about the general construction. It's a combination of base and supplemental loan dollars, and that's nearly the same to the borrower. I think the main place it might make a difference is some of the BABA requirements that Roger was touching on, picky things like signage and that sort of thing that we'll have to make sure we're keeping track of. But just because a project is listed with base or supplemental for construction dollars may not be how it actually plays out. We just have to demonstrate that need to EPA when we put these documents together. There are preliminary loan terms in terms of the number of years of repayment. The administrative fee, all of our interest rates are 0% still, but the administrative fee, which is calculated as a percentage, and potential loan forgiveness, those are shown on the IUP. And again, that's showing to EPA that we have a plan for all of that. And we've looked at eligibility for loan forgiveness and other forms of subsidy. They are subject to change based on the actual loan application and authorizations. So if the numbers change in terms of the project or the data that we have about a water system, we will use the actual loan application. And then also the actual project amount is going to be based on specific line items. So at the time a priority list application comes in, it's a pretty general guess at cost. And by the time we're in a loan application, we'll have a lot more specific line item authorizations. In terms of disadvantaged subsidy for drinking water, there's two forms of subsidy that the drinking water SRF gets. There's what we call additional subsidy, which is a little confusing because that's just the subsidy that can go to anyone. It's loan forgiveness on top of other things that SRF does to subsidize loans, like having low interest rates and long repayment terms. The disadvantaged subsidy is a newer thing in the drinking water SRF. It's been around for a while now, but it was the second one of those. That is explained in guidance document 10, and that little flow chart I've got at the bottom is also in guidance document 10, along with a different version for private water systems. There's a specific sequence, and the definition of disadvantage subsidy for drinking water is set in state statute. So we're following a combination of the federal grant requirements and then the state statute requirements to go through for a given project, and in order look at, is it eligible for a longer loan term? So kind of the default is 30 years, but some can go up to 40 years. That's provided the asset that's being constructed has a useful life of at least 40 years. And then I can lower the admin fee, which starts out at 2% for municipal loans, and can lower that down all the way to 0%. As I go through these stepwise, it starts out a little higher and can still go to 0 for private water systems. And then for actual loan forgiveness, which is often what people focus on, that form of disadvantage subsidy comes out of the calculation if the water system is eligible and if we still have it available at that point in time. Because in addition to running out of loan dollars, so the municipal flow chart there, it's really that second box from the left is where the loan forgiveness comes in. It's for communities that have a local median household income below the state, and that also have a user rate greater than 1% of the MHI. So basically, it's a lower income community, and the project itself is going to have an impact on raising user rates. That user rate calculation is not something we're pulling off of water bills. It's looking at factors of what is the existing debt payment, what are existing reserve contributions, what is the user base of cost being divided, and what is the cost of the new project being proposed. Next slide. Okay, so that was all the general. Let's skip into the lead portion specifically. So there's two parts to the lead. First, I'll cover the service line inventories. In general, DWSRF, we can't pay for routine compliance requirements for the basics of running a water system that's not eligible for our loan program. The service line inventory is a little different because there's a specific focus on reducing lead exposure as a public health issue. And this is not just a sort of small piece of paperwork. This is a very large requirement with special eligibility that Congress built into this. So the service line is between I'm just thinking about a municipal system is between the street main and the building. So not water mains, not a big distribution pipe. It's kind of the last piece between the street main and in most cases, there's a portion of that that's owned by the water system. There's some kind of connection point at which it switches over to private ownership. Both of those portions are eligible for DWSRF funding. And I'll say a little bit more about that when we get to the construction piece. This is all being driven both by the effort to get rid of lead and then also tied to a specific lead and copper rule revision requirement. All community and NTNC systems have to inventory all of their service lines by October 2024. That's not just any old inventory. It has to meet specific requirements from the Drinking Water and Groundwater Protection Division. They have a website about the lead and copper rule revisions, and they have a training that they offer that goes through those and also how their Excel template works. This is really looking at reviewing records and visual inspection. So not about digging up the ground. It's not about extensive water quality sampling. This is about looking through town records, construction records, visual inspection of people's basements, so non-invasive type work to identify this. There's things you can do with magnet tests and color tests and that sort of thing. So what's really going into the inventory? It's the material of the service lines. So what type of metal or plastic it is. Not just the service lines, but also connectors that are sometimes called goosenecks or pigtails based on the shape, and some other general information about the distribution system that's connecting into it in terms of the diameters and that sort of thing. Next slide.
Amy, just be mindful of time. If anything we can do to wrap up fairly quickly to leave sufficient time for a comment at the end as well.
Yep, I think I have 3 slides left.
Okay.
So the service line inventory is a specific type of planning loan for the very smallest systems in the state, which is actually several hundred of them, more like 600 of them, that we are providing through the set-asides free technical assistance to get those done. For a lot of those systems, it's not going to make sense to have those done via a loan for about the largest 70 or 71 systems. We do have a planning loan. Got budgeted for that as planning loans through this program. And there's some forgiveness we can offer for communities under 120% of the MHI, where we forgive the first $100,000 and half the amount over that. It's complicated, the reasons behind that, but it just has to do with how we have to meet a very specific target for EPA. And if we can give out more loan forgiveness later, we will. There's a special version of the loan application that we made because this is such a different program. That is the one exception where I broke the rule on submitting via ANR online, and these come in through a specific email address that's on the form. And there's some special policies with these. They're on the IUP page and also on our forms page. And you do need to either go the route of hiring a contractor or engineer. It doesn't have to be a professional engineer for these. It could be a different type of contractor, which is a little different from most planning loans, or there are some options for using your internal workforce account, but there's some very specific requirements about that. And you go one route or the other for the initial inventory. And then once you know more about what components of lead you have, you can start getting into a later loan or amendment where you try to resolve what's still unknown with other techniques like water sampling and creating a lead service line replacement plan if you have lead and that wasn't already included in your initial loan, and then design work related to figuring out how you're going to remove the lead connectors in the service line replacements. And I will say with that, while sometimes that type of work doesn't require construction permits on individual service lines, the historic preservation work can be extensive on those. Next slide. So all of this inventory work is meant to get into actually getting the lead out. That's the whole point. So the lead money is a large quantity and it's intended to fund construction to remove lead. So most of our systems are still in the inventory phase, but we hope in the next couple of years to move to a lot of construction work. The drinking water SRF definition of a lead service line is fortunately broader than the lead and copper rule. So we can fund for more stuff to get out lead and potential lead, which is good. Full or partial lead service lines, these lead gooseneck, pigtail connector sort of things. Galvanized that was downstream of lead, or galvanized and you don't really know what the history is, which is common in old water systems. You cannot leave a partial lead line behind, like just replacing the water system side and leaving a lead partial service line on the private side. And then the private portions, though, this sometimes people don't realize it's allowed federally, and specifically Vermont has said we will allow private portions of service lines to be included in the loan. So that's something the borrower, the water system owner, should try to incentivize this to help get any kind of lead out. There's also funding for certain types of certified lead filters. Just a note, corrosion control meters, the street mains, and non-lead service lines end up getting funded off the general DWSRF. That's going to be a little bit of a challenge to track in real construction, because oftentimes it makes sense to replace the mains and the connected service lines at the same time. So we will work with projects to make that make as much sense as we can. I won't go through, in the interest of time, I won't go through tons of details on the lead construction. But again, the forgiveness is based primarily on the local income, and we do have a lot of loan forgiveness to give out on lead construction. So I hope we can get to those projects and get the last of the lead out of the state. Last slide is the emerging contaminants program. Just like last year, for this year, emerging contaminants were specifically focused on PFAS in Vermont. And this can be either removal treatment or development of a new source that does not have PFAS. It doesn't have to exceed the state maximum contaminant level. It just has to be documented that you have PFAS. It's considered an emerging contaminant. There is a federal standard in development, but they've specifically said that this will still count as an emerging contaminant, even if a federal standard is created in the next few years. Some of our projects for this type of funding are large enough that we don't have enough emerging contaminants to fund them all on this source, so they get split between the EC and the general lists. And this one, we can't call it a grant. Grants are handled a little differently in terms of reporting requirements, but all the money that we give out on emerging contaminants is required to be 100% forgiven. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Amy.
No more. You have any more?
Not that. Yes, all day.
On the emergent contaminants and going back to the planning loan subsidy. So do I read it correctly then that all emergent contaminant planning and design goes through the general planning loan, for lack of a better term? And the hope is that when that comes to a construction project and you get the construction loan, you're rolling all that planning in so that there is a little skin in the game for these people, at least initially. They're not getting the planning forgiveness that they were in step 1 and step 2.
They're not getting it up front, but given that there's 5 years for it to go into, to roll into construction or repayment, that's the hope for that. And the logic behind that is trying to get as much of the emerging contaminant money out the door to current projects right now, rather than setting it aside for planning and design and then waiting to see if those come in the next cycle.
Yep.
Because it sort of seems like, well, we can always do the planning and design on a rolling basis out of the general, and then we can move the project onto emerging contaminants later before it has gone into repayment.
And not that I hope we ever get to this point, but if we rolled out the 5 years on the planning loan, is that an option to kind of extend and roll that out? If you get into a scenario where your loan is going to come due before your construction project comes to full fruition. Not that I see that happening a lot with these, but.
I don't think we can go beyond the 5 years. I also think we wouldn't go beyond 5 years, even if it was on the emerging contaminant money.
Understood.
So we'll have to evaluate that. That was, if you have specific comments about that, concerns about how that might play out over time. Really the logic behind, last year we left some slack in there for, I think we did sort of a mini put aside for planning and design work. We could have done that this year, but really we looked at, we have several large projects that need the money now.
Sure.
Keep those moving, and we'll evaluate as the projects come in. So that could be something that we can do differently again next year.
And then I guess just one general comment about both programs. You guys have a lot going on, and I'm sure the inboxes and the phone calls is excessive. One suggestion I would like to make is a front-facing, public-facing database for loan progress. That should
Exactly
cut.
what we're working on.
Okay.
I should have included that in the program update. We recently undertook work with external contractor to revamp the database, and that's one of the main features is you can track it real time and interface and load your documents. We understand that that's been.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah. it's been-
Well, I'm sure it'll just cut down a lot of your phone calls.
Okay, well, in the short term, it's a lot of work. So it is a significant drain on staff time, but like I mentioned briefly, that the goal is to have that ready to deploy in March. I just wanted, Liz, if you're still online, just wanted to provide an opportunity for you to continue your comments. We'll be here for a while still.
Wait, we have more.
Take other comments first.
See a hand up at the moment, so yes.
Sorry, we're trying to tell you in time. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I'm just trying to.
Burning only come to town, maybe spill from also the Escutney water. Everything is the chair of our water district. We have our water district apprentice here as well. I'm here today because we didn't get funded. The project wasn't on the high priority list. And I'd like it to be changed to be on the list. Yes, we already want our projects to move forward. But we have several projects in town that are almost contingent on this project being completed. We have an affordable housing, 12 affordable housing units coming into town. That's the most growth this town has seen in like decades. We're it's Scotney, Vermont, and we also have Perkinsville, Vermont. Our water district currently serves 200 residences, half of which are in a 55 plus community, a low income 55 plus community. Our water district serves our school, our churches, the town hall, the library, farms, and local businesses. Our water district could expand following repairs that need to be made. So right now, I don't feel comfortable signing water allocation applications because we have to stabilize our system. And right now, based on what I've heard from our engineer and from our water operator, our system is not stable. We have a new veterinarian clinic coming to town. That's another new local business that we need to provide water to. And again, our water main needs to be replaced, so we can't. I contacted this program back on June 25th of 2020 with these concerns. I was told then that the application would open on January 1st. So we got everything ready to apply for on January 1st. I think it was like January 6th, I reached out to Megan Young. Are you here? Hi. And at that time, I was told the applications, everybody was already funded. So between January 5th and January 1st and January 6th, we couldn't even have an opportunity to put an application in. And the application period was between January 1st and March 15th. I don't think that's fair. I don't think anybody would. I worked in Massachusetts for several years. And when you have an application period, you have that amount of time to fill out the application. And then applications are reviewed after the period ends. I don't understand how applications are funded 6 days into the application period. So we decided, the next application was 12 months from then. So we were like, all right, we'll fund it ourselves. We don't have a ton of reserves. I think we had 180,000 in our bank account at the time. Now we're down to like 130, 120,000 in our bank account, which is like nothing. You're a water district. But we did it. We spent the $30,000. We hired a fantastic engineer. It's been great to work with Craig. And we completed the engineering. We got permitted. We're shovel ready. We even have contractors interested in the project. Then we find out that we're not getting funded this year. And that's really unfortunate. That's really unfortunate news for us. We're told to, to apply for other programs. That's an easy scapegoat to push somebody over somewhere else so that maybe they don't get funding there either. And that's what's been happening to us for 3 years. I kind of share her concern because that the program is kind of difficult. It really is. We want to grow our town. We want affordable housing. We want to attract local businesses. That's like the main part of my job. And right now I can't do my job because we can't get funding. So what do? And then this turnover in town managers, this turnover on committees. And by then it's like people's bio is gone. So what I'm looking for is hopefully for you to change your mind and fund our project this year. I don't agree that you get points for plans, 20 points for an asset management plan. I agree that you should be doing asset management plans, but that shouldn't increase your points. It's a good way to get people to do them, right? Because you get more points so that you can get construction funding. But construction funding shouldn't be contingent on plans. We have plans, and those plans will build a project. And that's what we'd like to do. So I just wanted to share our comments. We drove here from Ascutney to do that. I did share a little via email with you guys. I plan on continuing to do this until we get funded.
Thank you. Appreciate the comments. Will you be submitting written comments? Submitting those comments in writing as well?
If somebody take a minute.
We are recording it, and you can also provide it. It's helpful, but not required to provide them to any of the emails there. That would be helpful because we do, as part of the final IUP, intended use plan and priority list, we do publish a response to all the comments we receive. There's things we can do regarding a given priority list application. We can review it to make sure it was scored properly. We don't have the ability to say, yeah, well, that we hear this one is important, so we're going to give it more favor. Obviously, we can't do that. We need to stick with our procedure. And I do recall vaguely some of the correspondence that you'd submitted previously. I don't really think we have the time to get into it now. There could be a misunderstanding between priority list applications and funding applications. But we will be responding. So
the main thing is we need to get funding this year. I get there's other programs. And we could get pushed off another year or 2 years. We've been trying this since June of 2020.
I hear you. It is unfortunately competitive. Any given year, we don't have enough funding for all the projects. And part of that asset management planning.
Based on need.
I'm sorry, what?
It shouldn't be competitive. It should be based on need.
I mean, that's a reasonable comment for us to change how we do the priority list scoring. That's a big change. You know, that's changing the rule, changing statute to reconfigure and potentially also some of the federal regulations under which we work. We do acknowledge that it's a complicated program. We'd love to make it simpler. We'll continue to endeavor to do that. We have a lot of different regulations to answer to. And we understand it does get in the way of participating if it being as complicated as. Yeah.
This isn't directed as criticism on you or any of your staff. You know, this is really just critiquing the program. I mean, you guys communicate very well, especially recently. The communication has been great. But, you know, now I have to translate that to the town that I represent and the water district that I represent, and they don't understand.
Couple specific things I can mention.
Sorry, Amy, before we respond more, I just want to make sure that because we're running low on time, if there's any more comments or questions in the room.
Just a quick question. Has there been an update on the bypass for federal fiscal year 2022? It sounds like maybe you had a priority list application then, but I haven't seen any updates on the bypass from last year.
Yeah, we don't have any. We're going to roll right into next year, which those funds do become available. But yeah, we understand, we were buried in projects this year and weren't able to fulfill all our bypass.
I have some other questions, but maybe I'll talk with Amy about them offline afterwards. I need to tie up to that.
That's fine. I mean, I'm not running out at 3. I just want to make sure for folks who are on a schedule that they've got a chance to.
I had a question about the congressionally directed spending. So you said at the beginning, as I understand it, that was taken away from the SRF, that money, a part was taken away. So I know of a couple of communities who qualified for that, but they have to go through more steps. They have to actually do an application to get the congressionally directed spending funds. However, it's for the same project that they've been on the SRF for a long time. So I suppose we would have heard about this by now, but is there any way that the money that was taken away from the program overall, but now is coming back to the community, but then yet through another application process could just be more direct, go back and be administered as SRF funds?
No, I mean, no simple way that I can think of. I think the program would have to apply, our program would have to apply for a CDS request to receive funds. So I think once they've gone that route, that's where they are.
Sure.
I got one other question. So I see for step 3 construction loan applications to be considered for additional subsidy, you've added in all permits must be in place, including Act 250 and environmental review. Previously, it used to just be permit to construct, if I recall correctly. What is the rationale as to why all permits are required now for consideration and additional subsidy? The permit to construct from the Drinking Water Groundwater Protection Division is typically a requirement to get your Act 250 permit to be finalized. And other permits are required, but why are other permits holding up additional subsidy?
And that's for securing it, like locking it in, not being eligible for it on the priority list.
I guess it's just like
Something we can give it a review. I don't know when it changed or why it changed. We can give that a look and respond to that as part of the response summary.
Patrick, you have a hand up online that's been waiting for a while.
Okay, thank you. It didn't show up earlier. Yeah, I'm going to jump back to the hand and then.
Mine was kind of a follow-up on Nate's question on, I guess I don't understand how you're not doing the bypass with the monies from last year and just rolling into this year with monies that were allocated in that particular fiscal year when you had people who were relying on that bypass process.
Yeah, it was simply a matter of capacity. We couldn't keep up with the loan applications that we have.
So are the monies from this year getting put into this next intended use plan?
Yes. Okay.
I respect the inability to, I guess my comment is, I'll put in writing, I respect the fact that the staffing was overwhelmed, like 100% get it. It just seems unfair to the process.
It is. Great. Noted. Thank you. I see the hand. I can't see the name. Sorry. Someone on.
So.
Oh.
Beth?
Yeah, so Seth Jensen, Lamoille County Planning Commission. I'll be submitting on behalf of VAPTA more details related to these comments, but two very quick things. One related to affordability criteria. We'll be submitting some comments with some recommendations for additional Vermont-specific criteria for consideration. And then the second, which is longer term and bigger than the IUP, but something that I think all of us who are involved in local, regional, or state level policy and planning should be thinking about, is the fact that the flooding that occurred earlier this month, many of the areas that were impacted are the existing water sewer areas, and in the next upcoming cycles, as a state, Vermont is going to be needing to think about how to direct funds to secure what's there in terms of infrastructure, but also to think about how to plan infrastructure in areas that are safer. We can buy people out of the floodplain, but if they don't have any place to go, they don't have any place to go. So those are just two issues for ongoing consideration. And just a general comment to close, just thank you to the department for ongoing support of the villages and other small communities. That's been a, real investment with ARPA that's, has the potential to have very meaningful impacts in rural Vermont.
Thanks, Seth.
Associated names.
I don't see any other hands up.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other comments or questions in the room?
I was hoping that we could talk more about the bypass procedure, because I think there's opportunities for some of the communities to learn more about it and how that bypass works to fund projects that are currently below the fiscal line. I don't know that that's always well understood.
Sure, you want to cover it up too much?
Yeah, can you go back to the bypass criteria slide?
I mean, is there assurances that the bypass is going to be tracked and adjusted this year?
Water question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
The follow-up to that too is when I say Champlain Water District, we more than likely will not see any subsidy whatsoever. But it seems to me like the amount of funding and subsidy as you go from year to year and the further you get kicked in the bypass process, the less and less opportunities there are going to be for that funding. So to take a healthy year like this year that had that kind of money and have somebody who was on the cusp of it, and Champlain Water District's on the cusp of it, so selfishly I'll say that, but especially from a community that might be on the cusp of it with subsidy, seems like a very unfortunate situation. And I will say again, I respect we work very closely with everybody here, and I know all the hard work that everybody puts in here, so that in no way, shape, or form is a comment on all the hard work that everyone does. It's just that's the lens that I'm looking at it.
Thank you.
So I can go ahead and just talk a little bit more about this bypass process. So in one of the earlier slides, there was a date of August 25th. So if you're a project on our priority list and the IUP is adopted and you become fundable, you get a letter, and it lays out the schedule. And it will say, if you don't do these, we're going to bypass you on each of those instances. And not all projects, because you can get on the list you have to have a preliminary engineering report, but then the project can proceed at different pace depending on the engineering firm, consulting engineering firm schedule. But what's that? Bond vote. Passing a bond vote is a big one. So, I mean, this is designed so that if a project starts to lag, you know, on schedule, and it becomes clear they're probably not gonna make construction by July 1st of the following year, then we can bypass them. And when we do that, we go and send out funds availability notices to the people that are affected, that are outside of the fundable line, in the amount that the project being bypassed was worth. So if we have a $10 million project that gets bypassed, on our list, you can look at it, and there's probably like 3 or 4 projects to make up $10 million. So to say that you didn't immediately get funding doesn't mean you won't get funded for the year. Maybe a good idea would be to look at some of the projects that are going ahead and speak with your design engineer, because they will have an idea of the progress that's being made on existing projects.
I've just got a question about this schedule related to timelines. So submission of a loan application November 1, that's fine. Your schedule seems to indicate that the designer then, or the town or the municipality would have to move forward without that loan actually being approved in order to meet your other deadlines that you have there. In order to have a 90% design in 2 months from submission of that loan, now, granted, I'm using worst case scenario related to all of that. Your schedule seems to conflict entirely with how long underwriting is taking on some of these loans right now. And to the point before, that's not a comment on anybody in the room or anything else. It's just the reality of the capacities that all of these things have. So I guess back to the original point about whether you guys are going to have the capacity to do this bypass, it is almost that if you are at a step loan 1 on November 1, 2023, you're already, the chances of you meeting those other criteria you have there are pretty much slim to none. So is it more realistic to say that your step 2 loan needs to be submitted in the next 2 months from today to even have a chance to meet any of those other loan thresholds? I guess that's what I see. I see anybody who's on that schedule has no chance of a project moving forward in the reality that we're in the next 1.5 to 2 years, as far as how long loans are taking to be processed.
We can come back to this. Wayne's got his hand up.
Yeah, Wayne.
Thanks, Patrick. Just a quick comment for Tom. Third item down there, that probably needs to be reworded on the submit 90% design drawings. You know, that's standard for the clean water side, but it doesn't really apply to drinking water because we don't really do a 90% design drawing submittal, especially with some of the staffing, constraints. You know, we really submit to 100% or close to 100% for the construction permit. And I know we've had some discussions about that as far as, reimbursements and things like that, but that probably needs to be worded because it's for the drinking water, says you have to have a construction permit. So, you've got to submit 100% drawings way back in October 1st, November 1st, I would say, to have that. So that probably needs to be considered, I guess, and maybe reworked a little bit as far as exactly what that requirement is. Thank you.
It might be a drafting error on my part. I'm not sure what the IUP says, but I was blending the 2 IUPs, trying to have one slide to cover it. So I may have garbled some stuff, but we'll take a look at that. Thank you.
Another question. So that number 3 that he's talking about there, so on the priority list right now, are there projects that don't have a permit?
Yes, a lot of them. Absolutely.
Probably most of them. So if we're permitted, does that make us have more points? You would think it would.
You get additional points for having.
I say it should do. Okay.
And so acknowledging kind of what happened last year and moving into this year, is there anything that the program is looking to do to try to make sure that the bypass does occur this year? That if,
Yeah,
I mean, you're likely gonna have the same scenario that you had last year.
absolutely. And I think, bypass was all about capacity to get loans through. I mean, if we could have bypassed, we still couldn't have processed those loans.
Correct. Yep.
Yes, yeah, we had a fourfold increase in loans, and it was a long time before we saw another person to help process those.
Mhm.
A person would do, as Amy noted, we do have a couple of folks who just joined the program. So, and, just increasing our staff capacity applications were sort of skyrocketing just before Bill, and then Bill has, compounded our workload significantly.
Mhm.
So it's just, yeah, we will make every effort to, to enact bypass this year and work, chip away at the backlog of loans.
Question for Tom, if you don't mind. Under the last bulleted item, submit step 3 funding application, clean water for drinking water. On the clean water side, because we don't talk about final design approvals as part of this schedule here, would you need to have a final design approval in order for your step 3 funding application to be deemed complete?
No. In the earlier slide, we would hold subsidy for a draft DSA RFQ documentation, which if they're at step 3, we probably already have. But it's the step 3 engineering service agreement and the loan application that would get it reserved. We wouldn't be able to get a loan approved for step 3 without a final design, but it won't keep us
It
from.
won't prevent you from meeting that deadline of 6:30.
That's correct.
Okay, good, thank you.
It's a question in the chat. Robert Clark.
Drinking water.
Robert Clark asked, do you have a similar readiness to proceed bypass table for village water and wastewater ARPA grant funding?
So there's a similar process, but it's not really a bypass process because the awards for the ARPA program are in progress. And all of the money is awarded. In order to have any additional funds made available, the money has to be rescinded from the award that's already been made. And that the communities that have awards know that. Just different, a grant process versus a loan.
Yeah, I just want to add again, again, we accept written comments for another week, in addition to any feedback we've received today. Yes.
Not to harp on the bypass thing, but in a normal year when we're fully staffed, how often does drinking water get to the bottom? Never.
I don't think
Not
so.
to the bottom, but I mean, definitely projects move up.
Not to the bottom of this year's list, that's for sure.
How about in clean water?
I bypassed everybody that got bypassed. Everybody that was below the fundable line was notified that they were fundable. And we still didn't use all that money.
I guess I'll submit this via written comment. My perspective is that anybody that is actually truly ready to proceed, that is on this current fiscal year list, should be moved to the top of next year's fiscal list
Just
to honor the bypass process.
We have a project, filter water tank 2. We've got it, everything's been done that's required for the bypass period to be eligible. The only thing we're missing is a construction loan application. We obviously didn't submit a construction loan application because we were waiting to hear if we made the bypass. But we have a pressing need to replace that tank. And it was just below the fundable range in federal fiscal year 2022. And now we're sort of still waiting in limbo, similar to Weatherfield to Scutney, because the bypass period didn't occur. So now we're back here waiting again, move that project forward, and now we won't know until the bypass begins again in January. We understand reviewing the applications, but it's just a little bit of a heartache.
Selfishly, I'll also add, if I was able to do that in this year's dollars, I would gladly do it versus doing it in the unknown of next year's dollars.
Understood.
Thanks, Patrick.
That's a really good point.
Not to be confused with a heart bypass, so. Seems to be. No pun intended.
And I'll just speak to Dylan's January 1st, 2020 application. That was for an asset management planning loan, not a planning loan for construction. We were limiting those to 5 per year because we had limited staff. We have hired some more staff and we have some more funding, so that we are taking those applications on a rolling basis. But that is definitely a set aside project that's asset management planning loans. That's not construction. Loan.
It's not a priority list application.
Yeah, it's not a priority list application. It doesn't, there's not a bypass, all of that stuff. It's specifically to asset management plan.
Any more?
I don't see any hands.
All right, well, we're happy to stick around a little bit. Not seeing any additional comments, questions here or in the chat or raised hands. That will conclude the public hearing for the Clean Water Drinking Water SRF IUPs. Thank you all, appreciate it.